Alright, this is Chat UTD. Any manager that's worked under the Glazer regime at United is doing so under restrictions and with restrictions, and their ability to deal with those restrictions and thrive within those restrictions defines the amount of time that they get in the job. Going back to when the Glazers first came in 2005, when Ferguson was the manager, we just finished third, which, believe it or not, was there need to be an inquiry about it. Behind Arsenal, who was still a very good team at the time, and behind Chelsea. And the task was, can we get that title back anytime soon? And in 2 years' time, in 2007, we did. Let's look at between 2005 and 2007 and the work that was done in the transfer market in comparison to our rivals. In the summer of 2005, we bought Ji-Sung Park and Edwin van der Sar. Both went on to be super servants for Man United. Neither of them cost a lot of money. Shrewd signings. In this January transfer window, then we bought Vidic and Evra, who went on to become club legends. Neither of them expensive signings, just very well scouted. And in the summer before we won the league back, I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying we only bought Michael Carrick. A good signing, but you compare that to what Chelsea were doing at the time. Chelsea had Mourinho in his absolute pomp, the best young manager in Europe at the time, and they were buying everything that moved. They bought Petr Cech, Carvalho, Ashley Cole, Makelele, Essien, Joe Cole, Damien Duff, Arjen Robben, Didier Drogba, all within a couple of years. You compare that to what we were doing. We shouldn't have a chance of winning that title back within 2 years, and yet he did. And then went on and won 3 in a row. The other thing you've got to consider there is, with Chelsea buying all those players, it shrinks the pool of players we can choose from. But the bigger point here is they are buying a vast amount of players and spending a vast amount of money compared to what we were doing, and coming from a position of strength at that time, having already won the league in 2004-05, and we come back and win it in 2007 with shrewd signings, but certainly not a lot of money spent. Fast forward to 2009, Ronaldo leaves, £80 million world record fee. We signed that summer Gabriel Oberton for £3 million, Antonio Valencia for £15 million, and Michael Owen on a free. So there's £18 million that we've spent, despite just getting £80 million for Ronaldo. So there's £62 million unaccounted for there. More important than that, though, you've just lost at that time the best young player in the world, who the previous season had scored 30 plus goals, and the season prior to that had scored 40 plus goals. And you've not replaced him. You'd think the season after that would be an absolute slog. But the season after that, we finished second on the last day of the season by 1 point, and we got 85 points. And we were a Martin Atkinson decision away from being champions again. If you know, you know. So what do we do that summer in the hope of wrestling that title back the year after? Do we go on a spending spree? No. We buy Chicharito and Chris Smalling. In and around the times I'm talking about, we signed the De Silva twins, but I can't remember exactly when that was. But we're not spending daft money. But 2011, we're champions again. We get to the Champions League final, and we reach the FA Cup semi-final. The summer after that, he buys Phil Jones and Chris Smalling. Sorry, Phil Jones and those two just go together. Phil Jones and David De Gea. Quite a bit of money spent, but 2 young players. This is around the time when City was spending daft money. We lose the league on goal difference on the last day of the season. We get 89 points. Then comes what many refer to as his summer of indulgence, because he got Van Persie. Well, Van Persie was the only major signing that summer. I think that was the summer we signed Butner, the left back, and Anders Lindegaard. But in terms of major signings, Van Persie was the only one, and we go and win the league by a country mile. So for me, there's 2 distinct periods with Ferguson under the Glazers. There's when they first came in from 2005 to 2007 versus Chelsea's spending. We didn't have a prayer really in getting that title back, and yet we did and won it 3 times in a row. And when Ronaldo left, the following 4 seasons, up against City's spending, which was even bigger than Chelsea's spending. We win 2 league titles, and the 2 we don't win them on the last day of the season. One was by 1 point and one was on goal difference, and we get 85 and 89 points respectively. It shouldn't be able to happen. Shouldn't be able to do it when you look at what other teams are spending in that time. And also look at the midfield we had in that final season. He's picking from Tom Cleverley, an overweight Anderson, a 38-year-old Paul Scholes, a 39-year-old Ryan Giggs, who mainly played in midfield by that point. Darren Fletcher was poorly, so never ever played really around that era, and Michael Carrick. You compare that to what City had and what they were doing, it shouldn't be comparable. And we won the league by, 10, 11 points. So even the best worked with restrictions under the Glazers. He was just really, really, really good at it. We didn't buy a midfielder for 5 years. Don't know if you remember, we played Arsenal in the FA Cup in the late noughties at Old Trafford, 5th round. So it's a big game, placed in the quarterfinals at stake. And Arsenal, probably the 3rd best team in the country at that time. The midfield was right wing Rafael da Silva, centre midfield John O'Shea and Darren Fletcher, left wing Fabio da Silva. And we won 4-0. The difference was the culture. Because whatever team you picked, I remember him picking John O'Shea in centre midfield sometimes. Phil Neville in centre midfield sometimes, and Quinton Fortune, and that was before the Glazers. I remember him doing a job share between Roy Carroll and Tim Howard in net. He would always work with what he had, but the culture of the team, the culture of the club was set by him. And symbolically, the message he'd give you is this ideal for you to play centre midfield when you're a right back? Probably not, but if I didn't think you could do it, I wouldn't put you there. And I expect you to be as good or better than your opposite number for the opposition. And you play for Man United, and you play for me, therefore I expect you to meet that expectation. And he'd make them feel 10 feet tall in the process as well. And they were good players, fair enough. But we talk now, quite rightly, about not having a midfielder that we need. The goalkeeping department isn't very strong. We need a right back. I agree with all of that. But what Amorim has to get better at, and I'm going to bring it to the now, is making the most of what he's got, working with it. But for him, he has to create a subculture that's different to the culture of the rest of the club, because the rest of the club is rotten, as I've mentioned before. So let's get on to that and bring it to the now. In terms of making the best of what you've got, I'm going to come to Ugarte, who I've mentioned quite a bit recently. Ugarte was signed for upwards of £50 million last summer by Ten Hag from PSG. My understanding of it is that he was brought in as a midfield destroyer, someone to recover possession, to do the ugly stuff, to get in people's faces, and then give it someone better than him. Am I wrong? I don't know. That's what I thought he'd been brought in to do. Is that not the exact profile of player that we need in the midfield now? He's been there 1 year. And we're looking at Conor Gallagher on the last day of the transfer window as a anybody will do kind of option. We spent more than £50 million on him. So as I've said before, if you really don't rate him, then sell him. But if you're going to keep him, use him, empower him, coach him, mould him, get the best out of him, and let's see what he can do. Because whilst I don't massively rate him, and remember the success criteria is very different from when Ferguson was here. We're looking now, we're not looking at finishing top 3 winning titles. We're looking at finishing between 6th and 8th as a success. Is Ugarte good enough to help us to do that? I think probably yes. Is it ideal? No. You're not going to get ideal when you've got the Glazers as your owners. But I would say, about Ugarte, if he'd have gone to Brighton instead of PSG, I bet he'd have thrived, and I bet we'd be looking at him now. So as a coach, as a manager, coach him, manage him, get the best out of him, get him in the team. Same with Mainu. You've got to make the most of what you've got. It's not perfect. It can be square pegs in round holes. Make it work. It's the job of the manager to do that. In order for that to happen, it brings me on to the second point, really, or the 2 points interlink. Is getting the most out of what you've got and having a subculture, and the two things absolutely interlink. Amorim, to have any chance of staying in the job, has to get more out of what he's got, but in order for that to happen, he has to make a subculture. I said it in the summer. The reason United now, regardless of players, system, formation, managers coming in and out the door, never get a bounce, is that all hope, all optimism has dissipated at the club, because after 2 or 3 weeks, someone comes through the door and they realise this isn't what I expected it to be. There's a ceiling as to what we can achieve. The owners are not good enough. It's a commercially driven football club. The owners are hanging on for the new stadium. This isn't the great Man United I thought it was. I call it the zombie effect. You get good people come through the door and they get bitten by the mediocrity and apathy that has reigned at this club for far too long. So that's a massive problem. As I've said before, the club is rotten to the core. But that's not been created by Ruben Amorim. So he has to almost have an insular subculture within that dressing room where he shuts everything out and symbolically says to the players, I see all this. I see all these problems. We know it exists. Let's not pretend it doesn't. It's not what it was. It's not what fans want it to be. That shirt weighs heavy. I know all that. I'll tell you what, boys. We're going to create a culture in this dressing room, which is exclusive to this dressing room and when we go out on the training pitch and when we go out on the pitch at Old Trafford or wherever we're playing. And that culture says, I expect certain standards of you. I expect you to give absolutely everything you are capable of giving. And I know that's probably not going to lead us to the glory we want. But all I'm asking for is for us to run harder than other teams and for us to play to our ability, and to every duel is like your life depends on it. That's the culture that we're creating in our dressing room. And I'm not having excuses anymore of we don't have exactly the right pieces of the jigsaw puzzle to make it work. We haven't got them. So there we are. What are we going to do about it? Roll over and have our bellies tickled every week because we haven't got it exactly as we want it? Nah, losers do that. We're Man United. We do it differently here. So if I have to play a right back in centre midfield, or I have to play someone who perhaps previously hasn't been fancied and get the most out of them, that's what I'm going to do. But I expect you to come with me. If you don't come with me, I'll find someone in the youth team who will. You've got to start having those conversations, because as bad as this team has been, it's not 15th bad. I don't think it's 10th bad. I think if you swap these players and put them in Brighton shirts, they finish 6th or 7th without the pressure of playing for Man United and without the culture around them. So you've got to create a subculture. Otherwise, he's going to get sacked very, very soon. But part of that is you have to make the most of what you've got. And I spoke about Ferguson earlier, not to compare the two. They're not comparable. But the principles are the same. Ferguson was doing it to try and win titles. Amorim's got to do it to try and get us up to 6th, 7th, 8th, something like that. But the principles are the same. I would say, just to kind of complete the point on Ferguson though, it's not even a debate about who the best manager in the Premier League has ever been. It's Ferguson, because of the way of what I just spoke about before. He was able back in the day before the Glazers came in, he did have a relatively open checkbook, and he went through periods of spending quite big money and getting the best out of, the majority of the time he would get the best out of our big money signings. But he also had periods of time even before the Glazers came in where there was relative austerity, and we had great scouts, we had great recruitment, and he would mould players, and young players obviously would come through the system as well. So he's done all of it. He's done all of the different things. Spent money, not spent money, brought young players through, worked under the restrictions of the Glazers. He's done all of that. Pep Guardiola's never worked under the Glazers. He wouldn't be able to. So Ferguson's the greatest of all time. As the man himself would say, there's no question about that. There isn't. So like I say, I despise the Glazers. I hate them. I don't like Ineos. But they're the owners of the football club. And that isn't going to change anytime soon. So if you're a manager in that situation, I'm getting tired of people saying, but we haven't got this, and we haven't got that, and we haven't got this, and we haven't got that. What do we have? We've got this, and this. Right, we'll work with it then and make them better. in modern day Manchester United, that's what you have to do. If you can't do it, you're going to get sacked. That's the way it is. Just on what you said before, the Glazers they are our owners and they're not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. The fans certainly won't do enough to get rid of them. But I do retain faith that at some point, and I hope it's not in the too distant future, they will leave. Because something this bad, this wrong, I just believe the universe will throw us a bone. It cannot continue. I'm going to give you an example, which may not go down too well given who the band support and that they're not everybody's cup of tea. But growing up, I absolutely adored Oasis. Not just liking their music. It was like a culture. It was like belonging to something. It was United was my love, but I would follow Oasis everywhere, watching them almost like a football team. And when they broke up, I was beyond gutted. It's like a part of me had been taken away without wanting to be too dramatic about it. And I wished and I wished and I wished that they'd get back together. And then as I matured and I grew up, I sort of thought to myself, they will get back together. I don't know when, but they will, because it makes too much sense for them not to. And I just knew it'd happen, and sure enough, it's happened. With the Glazers leaving, they will leave because I've said this for a while, and particularly in the last couple of years. I know they're there to make money. I'm not stupid, but it doesn't make sense even for them. They're not going to be able to coin it in like they have done previously. And this stadium thing is somewhere in the distance, and there's too many things that don't quite add up. They will leave, but it won't be the fans that get rid of them because the fans haven't got any backbone. But something will happen. Things will conspire together, and they will leave this football club. One glorious morning, we'll wake up to the news that they're not the owners of Manchester United anymore, and I will celebrate like something not right. I will celebrate something chronic that day when they leave this football club, and it will be a blessed day. I hope you stuck with me on that, just so you can see, as I say, every manager's had those restrictions, even the best manager. But just like he did back in the day, to make it work is culture and it's making the best of what you've got. And those two things go hand in hand, and Amorim has to do that, otherwise he's going to get sacked. I'm going to do a preview of the City game and talk a bit about Onana leaving and Lamens and stuff like that on Friday. So I'll catch you then. Cheers. Glazers out.